Shalom Aleichem, a good night of Shabbos. Shabbos Mevorchim Chodesh Tammuz. Everyone knows the importance of this month. Gimel Tammuz, Yud Beis Tammuz. Shivasa B'Tammuz, Yehovchu Yom Me'elu L'Sasan L'Simcha. They'll be transformed to days of joy. But I want to talk about Chav Ches Sivan, which is in a few days, the 28th of Sivan, the day the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin arrived. It'll be 80 years ago, 1941, they arrived. You know, the word Chav Ches spells Koach, power. Koach also means potential. The potential is up to every individual. There is a discussion in Halacha, in Chassidus, of Koach and Poel. Do you look at a situation as it is in its potential, or do you look at a situation as it is in its Poel, in its actuality? Now, of course, everyone, will say, well, actuality, Poel Mamish, actuality is where it counts. But in Torah literature, there's also an advantage to Koach. There's also a virtue to Koach. What's the virtue to Koach, to potential? The virtue is that if a person realizes what their potential is, then they will ultimately use their Koach. They'll use their potential. And this is very important because many times we fail to realize our potential. Whether it's a low self-esteem, whether it's a misassessment of character. The Friedrich Rebbe in the Kuntres Achinuch V'Adracha, the essay on education and guidance, speaks about how important it is for the mashpia, for the educator, the madrich, to assess properly the student. Because if you under-assess him or you over-assess him, it can lead to damaging results. That's what he writes. It's very important to focus on the Koach. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin came in 1941. They miraculously survived the Nazis in Machshemam. They came, he was without a job, they just were beginning their life. They didn't have children. They came to a new world. The Friedrich Rebbe saw the great Koach of the Rebbe, and immediately he put him to work. He made him the director of 3 organizations, the Merkez Liyonei Chinuch, Koach, and Machne Yisrael. But I want to go back for a moment, a little history. How was he saved? What happened? So recently they printed a letter from Rabbi Yecheskel Fagin, who was the secretary of the Rebbe's, known as Chacha Fagin, that he wrote to Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson. And in this letter, he writes to him, actually, he wrote it on a separate piece of paper that was attached to the letter, and he writes there, after you read this, destroy it. And in there he says that the Rebbe he was known then as the Ramash, an acronym for his name, will not want to leave and come to America, because at the time when this was written, I think it was 1940 already, or maybe 40. He already left, I think, Vichy for Marseille, and he was in safe waters, in that safe haven. So when the Friedrich Rebbe, when the previous Rebbe gave a list of people he wants to take with him, and the Rebbetzin were on it, this was still before they arrived to safety. But once he made it over to safety, and it was relatively peaceful, Reb Chacha writes to Rabbi Yisrael Jacobson, I know him, and basically he doesn't want to have the glamour, He doesn't want to have the publicity. He wants to just sit and learn and do his work honestly, make a honest living, not to live off the public. And Reb Chatzah writes to Reb Yisrael, so therefore tell him that his father-in-law, that the Shver, that the Rebbe, needs him. He needs him. The Frierdiker Rebbe wasn't well, everyone knew that. And it'll make the Frierdiker Rebbe's life easier if he came to America. So Reb Chatzah writes to Rabbi Jacobson to write to the Rebbe from America, telling him that. How did he get out, Lepoil? So, in the book Out of the Inferno, written by Rebbetzin Rachel Oltein Shalom, the daughter of Rabbi Jacobson, she writes the details, but briefly, they convinced the government, the American government, the State Department, that the Frierdiker Rebbe and his entourage are like a melucha. They're a kingdom, a kingship of leaders and dignitaries. And for the greater Jewish nation, they're necessary. It's necessary for them to be in America. This ultimately convinced whoever it was at the State Department to grant them the visas. Because first, the Rebbe had given a reason to the State Department for wanting a visa, and they rejected it. Only after this argument was presented to the government, to the State Department, was accepted. And by the way, who was the one who came up with this idea? It was someone named Judah Gurari. Reb Yehuda Gurari, he was a son of Reb Shmuel Gurari, the famous chassid of the Rebbe Marash and the Rebbe Rashab. He had a son here in America. I think he lived on Long Island, at some point. And I heard at a Gudish Hasidic Chabad meeting, he came up with this brilliant idea, and they bought the idea, and that's how the Rebbe ultimately and everyone else got to America. So we talk about 80 years, Shmoinim Shonim, Gvura, the potential that the Frierdiker Rebbe saw in the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin coming to America. And what is it all about? So the Rebbe said in 1987, Tov Mem Zayin, when he spoke about Chof Ches Sivan, he said it's the time when the Chassidists came to Chatzi Kader Atachten, to the lower hemisphere. And the idea being that he's saying this kind of about himself. The Frierdiker Rebbe's coming to America was that concept, and he's an extension of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Therefore, it's one hemshich, it's one continuation. So we understand from this that the greatness of this day is to make the potential reality. The koach, chof ches, koach, potential, needs to be reality. But you need to understand what the potential is. And this is the brilliance of this Chof Ches Sivan. At least one of the ideas to think about is how to take a potential and to see in the potential it's far-reaching opportunities that makes it worthwhile to invest in the potential. I mean, you can talk about this with teachers and students, parents with children, even in the business world, to the stock that might be, look like nothing. At the end of the day, it's very successful. So you buy it when it's nothing because you see and understand the potential there. So my dear friends, it's Shabbos Mevorchim. It gives the koach for the whole Chodesh. What's giving the koach is the Shabbos Mevorchim. Included in this Shabbos Mevorchim is Chof Ches Sivan. Although we focus on Shabbos Mevorchim on Tammuz, but we must not forget that there's a Chof Ches Sivan, a koach Sivan. And Sivan is Torah, the Chodesh HaShlishi. It's the koach, the potential. Rebbe should help that with this koach that we will focus on and make part of our reality by taking the koach that the Eibishter gives to us as Yidden, and particularly as Chassidim and Chassidim of the Rebbe, that we will utilize this for good things and healthy things, and will be mefitz the Yadus, disseminate Torah and Chassidus all over, with Abbas Yisrael, with great simcha, with great joy. Even if things at times look dark and dim, we'll find the potential there for light and success. Everyone should have Shabbos Kodesh, Chodesh HaGeula, and we'll be zeicha before Gimel Tammuz to see our Rebbe Bereshenu, and we'll march together with Mashiach Tzidkenu to the Geula Shleima, Yerushalayim HaKodesh, B'mheirav Yameinu, Amen v'Amen.